want to thank you for coming in to join us today for another special Throwback Thursday edition of Office Hours. I was telling the good people at home, you've done many things in your life. You've been all around the world. We've been friends for some time. We've lived in different places together. Can you tell me and the viewing audience at home first, maybe where have you been
in the world.
in the world?
I'll start from where we met first, in the greater Boston area, around the city of Boston in the state of Massachusetts, in the country of the United States of America, on the planet Earth, um, third planet from the sun. Um, and then we met, we had some mutual friends. But however, we got to know each other much better after we both wound up in Taipei, Taiwan, which is on the other side of the globe. And you were there teaching English, I believe. And I was there studying and then working in TV production. Um, and in addition to that, I guess if I've been to many places, like I suppose, South America, Europe, um, Africa, Indian subcontinent, China. Um, so, yeah, sometimes for work, for making videos, making films, sometimes just to explore. But now I'm back in the U.S. as are you.
I'm back in the US. I'm in New Bedford, Massachusetts. You're up in Maine.
Maine.
And you at home, you're here for office hours. We're broadcasting live on Twitch TV. This will be on YouTube later. I want to get back, though, to what you were talking about before, Eli. You said when you were in Taiwan, when I was in Taiwan, we were both in Taipei. I was teaching, I was a teacher. Uh, what were you doing in Taipei?
Well, for a while I was a graduate student, but then afterwards I became a TV producer, producing TV.
So when you were producing, you were a producer.
Correct.
So you were, when I was teaching, I was a teacher. But when you were studying, were you were a, what would you say,
Studier.
a studier? Yeah.
So I guess we don't say studier, do we? It's a student in that case. Um, a studious student, even sometimes. But yes, when
Would you characterize, you were doing research, right?
I was doing research thesis,
So you were doing
and
research for your thesis. What were you researching for your thesis?
I was researching how people can learn electronics and technology skills in a community setting, maybe outside of a school, but also in a learning environment. So that's what I was researching. So you could say, I don't know, what could you call me in that role?
So, Eli, once again, for our viewers at home, our viewers who are viewing this stream right now, I'm Mr. Green. We're with my friend Eli. He was a student in Taipei. He was doing research. He was a researcher, and you were
Researcher.
researching, sounds like digital learning. So, people who were digital learners or remote learners. Does that sound right?
Um, Actually, this was in one important element was it was in person. I mean, there could be a remote component, but these were people getting together in a space and teaching each other how to make electronics and write software and things, but usually in person.
So, like a space where people are making things. So maybe like a space for makers. Would you say?
You could say that. I think that term that's become a popular term. Makers now sort of refers to that approach and that area of interest. Robotics and coding and making little devices in kind of a DIY way is all people who do that kind of stuff, who are into that stuff. They call themselves makers.
Would you
Um,
call yourself a maker, Eli?
I am. I wish I had more of the technical skills to make more stuff. I have. I'm good at making videos, but maybe not at making robots. So I don't know if I'd call myself a maker, but I think it would be great to be more of a maker.
And then what about, so tell me more about when you produce TV and you said producing videos, you were
Yep.
a TV producer. What kinds of television have you produced around the world?
Well, I did a particular type of TV production. You could call it like documentary TV production. Excuse me, or say nonfiction TV production. So the shows were kind of like, well, here's an example. It's sort of like, Animal Planet. If you're watching shows about animals, it's not, the animals aren't reading a script and you're not shooting a drama that you rehearsed with them ahead of time. It's sort of it's the real actuality of the situation. So that I would call, that's in the realm of documentary. And so the type of TV that I was making was documentary television. Some examples are, you'll see on the Discovery Channel or National Geographic Channel, kind of science based, a lot of it. And that's what we were producing. That's what I was helping to make as a producer.
And so, as a producer of documentaries, is there a special term that you would use for someone who produces documentaries specifically?
Um, Glutton for punishment.
Glutton for punishment. You can look that one up later, kids.
No, I think for documentary, I guess it would be documentary producer, documentary TV producer. There is a word for people who make documentaries that is doesn't end in er, and that word is documentarian.
Documentarian.
That's a little less common.
Can you think of some other words that end with the same ending as documentarian? So, like a documentarian. I think actually, when I lived in Taiwan with you, I was a vegetarian. I didn't. I didn't eat meat.
That right? Um, so that's a vegetarian is what you call someone who's vegetating. Is that correct?
I
uh,
guess
no, I don't think that's correct. But
people who work in libraries would be.
yeah, when you go to check out a book, you go see librarian.
That sounds right. That sounds familiar.
Do we have another one? Librarian. Well, I can think of the other food ones. There's
Hmm.
pescatarian.
Those are people
Um,
who eat fish. Like the Spanish word for fish is
Pes.
comes from Latin. We've been talking a lot about language here. We've been doing a lot of language study on office hours. The doorbell's ringing, but we're gonna not worry about that. Eli, I want to get back to talking about learning and learners who are using digital tools to learn. People are using the internet right now because of the coronavirus. A lot of students, a lot of learners, and teachers are at home. That we're using the computer. We're using new technology. Do you have any advice, maybe things that you learned as a researcher, researching the makers who were making software and making electronics, things as they were working together in these spaces? Do you have any advice that you can give to maybe the students at home, middle school students, high school students, college students, people on the internet? What's the most important thing that you learned, I guess, in your time as a researcher?
In that particular area, I think one of the most important things I learned was the role of patience and empathy. Empathy, patient, meaning just that you know, don't get don't get angry or anxious quickly something, and the empathy is trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes and see how they're feeling. Because one thing that happened, I was researching this community of learners who used different languages. They used Mandarin, Chinese, and they also used English. And some people didn't speak the other language particularly well. So when you're trying to explain something or communicate with a group or just one other person, and there are some language issues, of course you have to be maybe a little bit more patient and think about what it's like for them if they're not speaking in their native language. And then when you're trying to actually communicate like perhaps a more complicated idea, something about technology, for example, that just requires even more sort of patience, I think. So I mean, in remote learning and digital learning, I think the same thing kind of applies. I mean, many your audience, many younger people, students are extremely adept with all the technological tools, but everyone still uses them in their own kind of individual way, or is, you know, has different comfort levels and so on. So I think it's always good to remember that not everyone is experiencing the tools or the technology the same way you are, and try to imagine what it's like from the other person's perspective.
So different users are going to use the technology in their own way, like individual ways.
Either, I think, yeah, people use them in their individual ways, and then even if the use is the same, people's experience of it is not the same, is individual. um, so the fundamental thing is, I guess, coming back to every user of it, of the technology, is bringing their own background and skill and experience to it. So their interactions will all be slightly different than their friends or other people.
That makes a lot of sense. You talked a lot about patience. You talked a lot about empathy when we are communicating, when we're trying to communicate with speakers of different languages, learners of different languages. Beyond patience and empathy, do you have any advice for the people at home? We have 1 more minute left. Any more advice for how to become a better communicator?
I It really is. Sometimes I think there's kind of like a little bit of a Zen thing to it, like Zen, just meaning you're in a situation and you're trying to exchange ideas and mutually understand people. You 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 really have to think of the idea that what are you trying to get across, and what are you actually getting across, and are you sending out positive sort of energy? Are you sending out anxiety? I mean, just being aware of how you feel when you're communicating, I think, is one of the keys to being a better communicator.
So you have to think about your feelings, you have to think about how you feel, and that'll help you communicate a little bit better. Eli, I want to thank you so much for joining us. You're live up there in the cold north of Maine, and I'm down here coming to you live from New Bedford, Massachusetts. My name remains Mr. Green. I want to thank Eli one more time. I want to thank all of you at home for tuning in for Office Hours.